And we're live. I'm here with Jeff to review an episode of the Twilight Zone. This is the book I'm using. Very good book. Pretty recent. Second edition published in 1989. So I'll go over to the graphics and give the overview of the plot. And I'll do my Serling S intro of the... Perhaps Jeff might say, Ben, I should do this. Right. So this is the intro, and then I'll give the intro. I'll say what the plot is, and then I'll give the outro, I suppose. Street scene, summer, the present. Man on a sidewalk named Lou Bookman, age 60-ish. Occupation, pitchman. Lou Bookman, a fixture of the summer, a rather minor component of a hot July, a nondescript, commonplace little man whose life is a treadmill built out of sidewalks. And in just a moment, Lou Bookman will have to concern himself with survival, because as of 3 o'clock this hot July afternoon, he's stalked by Mr. Death. So, I have to say that the writing style of Rod Serling in these intros is a very interesting rhythm to it. So the plot is: sidewalk salesman Lou Bookman is confronted by Mr. Death, who informs him that he is to die at midnight. A persuasive man, Bookman succeeds in convincing Death to let him stay on Earth until he has had a chance to do his masterpiece, The Big Pitch, one for the angels. But Bookman has no intention of ever making that pitch. Realizing he must now take someone in Bookman's place, Death arranges for a truck to hit Maggie, a neighborhood child. The substitution is proceeding nicely. All that remains is that Death must be in the dying girl's room at precisely midnight to claim her. Bookman, determined that Death not take Maggie, makes a pitch so enthralling that Death misses his deadline. The child is saved. Having made his one big pitch, Bookman leaves with Mr. Death. And then the outro is Louis J. Bookman, age 60-ish. Occupation, pitchman. Formerly a fixture of the summer. Formerly a rather minor component of a hot July. But throughout his life a man beloved by the children, and therefore a most important man. Couldn't happen, you say? Perhaps not in most places. But it did happen in the Twilight Zone. So over to you, Jeff.
Well, again, somewhat like the first episode, it's a pretty straightforward thing. There's not a lot of oddity or weirdness to it. So there's not a whole lot to say, I feel like, as far as the plot itself, because, again, it's just sort of a, if I'm not mistaken, they call this kind of thing a morality tale, because it's basically like, this man, they don't say a whole lot about him as far as his background other than just that, like, what you just read. So you can sort of conclude that he's not been somebody who, that he's been a straightforward salesman, and that, he's a pitch man, but he's not necessarily a scam artist. He's not trying to, like, take advantage of people or anything like that. So the feeling is he's presented as a moral character, I guess you could say, and that obviously he doesn't want to die that night, but when presented with the the moral quandary of, well, either he is or this little girl is, then he makes the decision very quickly without even having to, consider it in any amount of time, that he doesn't want her to die more than he doesn't want himself to die. So he makes that choice to, and, given that he's made an arrangement with with Mr. Death, that he has to make this amazing sales pitch in order to die, then he decides to go ahead and do that before the Death can take the little girl. So, like you said, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of nuance to it. It's just this is the choice he's presented with, and he makes that decision. So as far as a production, the quality is in the presentation, the acting, the believability of the characters, rather than in any kind of amazing story elements. So, and I think all that holds up. I know we talked about actors before that we knew from other things. I know I've seen Ed Wynn in other things, but I don't off the top of my head remember exactly what he's known for. Maybe your book would tell you that. I don't know, but certainly of the two main people we have, they both give believable performances, and even the little girl, is decent.
Yeah, I wondered if she.
I would say the one element that I would say is they could have chosen to have the girl be, a more like imaginative type, where she would have, played into more of the Invisible Man stuff. But as it is, she was, just sort of said, "Oh, it's a game," so she was probably a censor.
Yeah. Yeah, but I love the way she said it. I thought that actually, I mean, just oh, it's a game. I just thought she played that well, and I wonder if she went on to do other things, because she seemed a pretty good actress. I like the line. Yeah,
I was just gonna say I haven't researched any of the background of the actors for this or anything, so I don't know.
Yeah, because it would be tricky because of like spoiling the episodes. But am I right in thinking? I think you were amused by the line when he said, "I don't want to go," and then Death said, "No, they never do."
Yeah, there was a few things he said that were pretty amusing, just kind of the dry, matter-of-fact way that he said things.
To me,
I don't remember specifically exactly what lines that I chuckled at, but there were a few.
And once you've read Please Understand Me Too by Kersey, you won't be able to escape it. Because I think this guy is such a clear example of ESFP and a sort of kindred spirit of Jeff, and sort of like that instinct of like doing the right thing, not really thinking about it like, okay, this is the right thing to do, this is the feeling I have, and the way he loves children. So do you think?
Yeah, he could be. I would say that there's not enough information to be definitive when it comes to that, but there's certainly nothing that would contradict that in terms of nothing that says this guy can't be ESFP. But I don't think it's like rock solid, because like I said, they don't really give much background other than just he's been this pitchman for a long time and that children like him,
No.
But that's so I would say insufficient data.
Yeah, but it's like,
make that conclusion.
But it's like your default, the sort of default typing until you like get any contradictory evidence would be like.
Yeah, I would say I've always said that when it comes to that the hardest to determine just by observing somebody for a few minutes really is introvert extrovert aspects. So he could be an ISFP also easily.
Yeah.
Because they don't really go into whether he's energized by people. I think as a salesman, you kind of figure, well, you lean more towards that just because you're going to spend a lot of time around people, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are, because you can. I would say there could be introverted people that can still be effective salesmen.
And there's another side to Kersey temperament theory, folks, where you could say, even if it's not his type, the role he's playing is like that of the performer, the ESFP performer.
Right. True.
So that's a way of looking at it from a sort of sociological point of view of saying, okay, which role is he enacting? It's just that Kersey thought there was a relationship between someone's predisposition to play a certain social role and then the social role itself. And of course,
I'd almost say though, as a salesman, that almost feels like he would be playing the role of promoter, even more than performer, because performer, you're kind of aiming. You know, your goal is to please the audience, get positive feedback from the audience. Whereas a promoter, you know, it's more like there's a specific agenda, you know, a specific thing you're trying to sell in some way. So
I've seen.
I would say a salesman, if you're going to say that there's
Yeah.
a default role, that a promoter might be actually the one rather than performer.
Yeah, but I think you're right there. It's just that with some people, though, it's almost as if they really enjoy doing it, and it's like more of an excuse to perform than
right.
to
I'm
sell.
not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just saying if you're just being technical about the role itself.
Yeah, you're right.
Then,
promoter.
Yeah. So I would say probably, I obviously don't have any way to prove this scientifically or anything, but because we can't prove types anyway, although some have come close. That I would say the majority of people who did his kind of sales probably would fall into the promoter category, but that doesn't mean that all of them are. It just means that would be because, as we've discussed before, when it comes to that morality of things, the promoters are probably the, again, this is not me saying they don't have morals, but it's me saying that they're probably the least hindered by those when it comes to their decisions in promoting. So someone, you know, isn't necessarily promoting products that are exactly reliable things. Or, you know, they might be willing to go a little bit further in terms of what they say in their pitch than someone who is more held back by the morality of it.
That was interesting with Only Fools and Horses with the main character of Del Boy. I'll just say this for a moment, that you actually had somebody who on the surface appeared, oh, this is like a flash ESTP, conning people, but to him it was a method of surviving and helping his family. And through various actions you saw, okay, this is like a guy who's like ESFP, who cares about people, and is like just a way to perform. And that was just how he survived when he grew up. When his mother died, his father left, and he was left looking after his younger brother. But getting back to this, another example of SPs outwitting SJs, with Mr. Death being a kind of ISTJ sort of character.
Yeah, complete with the like planner of deaths that he had with him. With all the facts of everybody.
Next time you once had a hangout where they were all all ISTJs, and you mentioned something about the planners, and they were all discussing them. And so if that happened again, you might think the planet of death.
It was a chat room I was in one time where I left the room for a few minutes, and I came back, and like 3 or 4 ISTJs were in the chat room, and they were all discussing their planners. So yeah, that's my theory, that if you leave ISTJs by themselves for more than a few minutes, then the discussion will always go back to planners.
This here gives the impression that in 1959, kids didn't have jealousy, because it's like 2 of them got a toy, and all of the other ones like have no reaction to that. Like, where's my toy?
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is you know, just the artistic choice that they didn't want to waste time with having the other kids do that, or whether it was, you know, more of a cultural thing in that particular environment. So it's hard to say on that.
Yeah, he'd have no stock left. So maybe I might have shot that with like fewer kids there. I just like the 2 of them. Yeah,
but what I was going to say from what you said earlier was that that all artisans are known for being adaptable, but they don't necessarily have the exact same motivations, like you said. So an ESFP salesman versus an ESTP salesman, you know, there could be slightly different methods or different motivations behind some of the things they do. They could appear to other people to be the same.
So I would think for the ESTP, it's about actually getting the sale, like almost like conning someone, persuading someone. And maybe for the ESFP, that's important, but it's the means of doing it. They're getting the performance right.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in general, that's probably the case. because, like I've said before, I'm always looking for opportunities to entertain people, and if other things come about in the course of that that are beneficial, as sort of methods to that, then that's sort of a bonus, but it's like
Yeah.
not the thing that's the most thrilling.
Yeah. Always for an opportunity, even when doing something typically associated with an ISTJ, you'll do it in an ESFP way.
Right.
So two good examples, folks, of ESFP and ESTP is, say, politicians: Donald Trump, ESTP; Bill Clinton, ESFP. But there were some things here about Serling wanted Edwin in the role. The writer thought that I'll just read this little bit out. Yeah, Edwin was initially, he was like, "Oh, that's rather a lot of words for doing the," because like he said, that they had a deliberate way of talking. But I thought it was okay. And so, despite Serling's assurances, Wynne was unable to overcome his inadequacies as a fast talker, and as a result, what was intended to be a spellbinding pitch comes across as thoroughly unconvincing. Fortunately, Wynne's compensatory strengths as an actor make this a moot point, and One for the Angels emerges as a moving commentary on mortality and self-sacrifice. And then there's some things about. Do you want to say anything about that, Jeff, or I could move on to the next point?
Well, yeah, I would say if there's one thing that it did come across as well. Is this really the great pitch? That it's more like just sort of a rehash, probably, of things that he's done before, but it was sort of out of desperation because at the time, the overriding factor is he's got to save this little girl. So, in lieu of having some kind of major thing that he knew, he just very quickly made the decision to just really go all out with the things he's always done. So that was like his best attempt at doing that.
Plus, we can always say that we don't know if the Mr. Death was crazy like a fox and appeared to be taken in by him, because at the start he
that's
wanted
what I
him to do the
figured.
thing.
Yeah, I figured that's what they were trying to say, is that the entire time that he knew that that's what he would do. So it was all sort of predestined, regardless.
Yeah.
And if you want to look at it as actually being in a quandary, you could say that it was sort of like the final test, because he does say that line where, is it up there? Like, he basically asking Death, am I going to heaven? And he says yes. And so that might have been sort of like his test in order whether he was going to be approved for heaven, that whether he would sacrifice himself for this girl, that all that was set up to do that. Yeah. You could very easily say that was the point of it.
And I like the fact that he wants to still sell stuff in heaven. So he enjoys it.
Well, and that's a very common, typical thing too. I think is people just sort of, the idea that they'll retain their personality in the afterlife. It'll just be adapted to whatever the situation that they go into is. And obviously, I think that's something else also that probably varies somewhat by type, is that there's probably, probably SJs are the most likely to think, well, still thinking about, the daily, like, logistical type things, even thinking about the afterlife of, what am I going to eat, or what am I going to, that sort of thing, as opposed to, intuitive types are probably more likely to think it's going, it would be this entirely different existence that doesn't bear much resemblance to human life the way we know it. So,
I mean,
probably a big gap there, a variation.
If people see EJ Arandia's new channel called God's Friend, the way he describes heaven, it's full of extreme sports. It's like ESTP heaven. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's not unique to him. I think there's several, like, I think Stephen Baldwin had a very similar thing. He was part of a thing that was sort of like a traveling extreme sports / Christianity show type of thing, which is, very often kind of the approach that SPs would take to something like religion or spirituality type stuff, that it's, this is the coolness factor of it, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know exactly how to put that. But.
here's an interesting bit about because Jeff and I are both interested in production sides of things. So I'll just read this little bit out and sort of, as a concession to Wynn's age, all of the episode's night scenes were shot during the day. This was accomplished by pulling tarpaulins over the backlot tenement streets, giving the illusion of night. But don't let this give the impression that everyone was bending over backwards for Wynn. On the contrary, it was he who extended himself to the fullest. He was outstanding, says assistant director Edward Denault. He was very prompt, knew his lines. I remember his chair was very close to the camera at all times, so it was never, I'll be in my dressing room, or anything like that. You turned around when you were ready, and Ed was sitting right there. He was a real joy to work with, a real pleasure. So
Cool.
Jeff might have heard similar things because you're interested in old school, like radio stuff and TV stuff, and maybe a difference in the culture of the performers.
Well, I remembered after you closed down the recording last week that I never gave, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago, but that first episode a rating. So I want to say in retrospect that I scored that one a 6 out of 10, and I'll give this one a 7. So
That's okay. I'll write that down. That's quite good because Jeff really loves Homicide: Life on the Street, and he gave quite a lot of their episodes 7. So
yeah, 7 is generally my score of something that I think is good. It holds my attention the whole time. There's positive elements, but there's nothing like that spectacular that really blows me away. Like, oh, this was just fantastic. So I would say the reason this was a 7 as opposed to that previous one being a 6 is that this one had a little bit more just enjoyable characters and stuff, whereas the first one is just kind of a guy reacting to what he witnesses in this abandoned town kind of thing. So it had potential for maybe more interesting elements, but there wasn't as much interaction of people, and this one had a little bit more of that. So
yeah, and I won't say anything about the next episode.
All right. So join us next week for whatever the next episode is.
Yeah, I have to button my lip about it. No, I will not prejudice just enjoyment of it. All right, here we go.
Yeah.